Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Tuesday, June 17th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside will be a hot one today, with a high of 92.4 degrees Fahrenheit and a low of 68.5 degrees. Be sure to stay hydrated, wear light clothing, and seek shade if you're spending time outdoors. Coming up on Alex's News, we'll dive into the evolving situation surrounding Israel's broadening strikes on Iran, examining the potential implications. Then, we'll shift our focus to California, investigating why the state is cutting its primary homelessness fund and what impact this decision could have on efforts to combat the housing crisis. All these stories and more are coming up next on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone. We begin this morning with truly explosive developments in the Middle East, where Israel's air campaign against Tehran, Iran, has entered its fifth day. The strikes appear to be broadening in scope, creating a very volatile situation. For more on this, we turn to our national security reporter, Ethan. Ethan, can you set the scene for us?
Thanks, Grace. Indeed, the situation is incredibly tense. As of today, June 17, 2025, Israel's assault, which some are calling Operation Rising Lion, began as a surprise attack on Friday, June 13, 2025. According to ABC News and NEWS 10 ABC, it targeted Iran's military and nuclear program, and we've since seen U.S. President Donald Trump issue a pretty ominous warning to residents of the Iranian capital.
Operation Rising Lion, what a name. And you mentioned it started as a surprise attack, but the summary also notes it's a continuation of an already overt conflict. Can you elaborate on that? Because for many viewers, this might seem sudden.
Absolutely, Grace. It's a key distinction. While the initial strikes on Friday, June 13, 2025, might have been a surprise in their intensity, this is not a new conflict. This current campaign builds upon a series of direct military exchanges throughout 2024. For instance, according to ABC News, we saw an Israeli airstrike on Iran's consulate in Damascus, Syria, on April 1, 2024, which killed several Iranian officials. That was followed by Iran's unprecedented direct missile and drone attack on Israel on April 14, 2024. The conflict further escalated with the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran on July 31, 2024, which was widely attributed to Israel. Then, direct missile and drone exchanges continued between the two nations in October 2024. So these events really set a precedent for direct confrontation, making the June 2025 operation a significant yet anticipated escalation of an ongoing overt conflict. Not a sudden start.
So this has been brewing for quite some time then. Ethan, what exactly are Israel's objectives with these broadening strikes, and what have they managed to hit so far?
Well, Grace, Israel states its primary objective is to prevent Iran from developing an atomic weapon. This claim is bolstered by warnings from the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, that Iran possesses enough enriched uranium for several bombs, according to ABC News. The strikes have been very focused, targeting Iran's top military leaders, nuclear scientists, uranium enrichment sites, and their ballistic missile program. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has asserted these strikes have set back Iran's nuclear program a very, very long time and confirmed daily contact with President Trump, as reported by NEWS 10 ABC. The Israeli military has claimed full aerial superiority over Tehran's skies, reporting the destruction of over 120 surface-to-surface missile launchers in central Iran, which is about one-third of Iran's total. They've also claimed to have destroyed 2 F-14 fighter planes and struck 10 command centers belonging to Iran's Quds Force. A significant target, according to ABC News, was the headquarters of Iran's state-run TV station, which Israel claimed was used to spread anti-Israel propaganda. Tragically, Israel also claimed to have killed Iran's top general, General Ali Shadmani, the newly named head of the Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, part of the Revolutionary Guard.
Wow, those are some pretty significant blows, especially the loss of a top general. But has Israel managed to hit all of its targets, or are there still some major challenges they're facing?
That's a critical question, Grace. Despite these claimed successes, Israel has not yet been able to destroy Iran's deeply buried Fordo uranium enrichment facility. This is a significant challenge for them because, as ABC News has reported, Israel lacks the U.S.'s 30,000-pound GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator and the B-2 bomber required to deliver it. So while they've hit hard, some key strategic targets remain out of reach for now.
That's a substantial limitation. Now, you mentioned President Trump earlier. His involvement and statements have been quite interesting. Can you elaborate on his ominous warning and what seems to be a complex, if not contradictory, U.S. stance?
Indeed, Grace. On Monday night, June 16, 2025, President Trump posted an ominous message on social media, warning residents of Tehran to immediately evacuate. He emphatically stated, and I quote, "Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon," end quote. This was reported by ABC News, NEWS 10 ABC, and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. What's intriguing is that Trump later denied that his early return from the G7 summit in Canada was to work on a ceasefire. He declared he was not looking at a ceasefire, but better than a ceasefire, stating he merely wanted people to be safe. This reflects a complex and seemingly contradictory U.S. stance, with Trump simultaneously rejecting an immediate ceasefire while also indicating he might send Vice President J.D. Vance and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to meet with the Iranians, suggesting he wasn't ready to abandon diplomatic talks entirely, as ABC News has uncovered.
It sounds like he's trying to walk a very delicate diplomatic tightrope. Ethan, what about the humanitarian impact in Tehran? A city of 10 million people must be experiencing significant disruption.
It's devastating, Grace. The Israeli military had called for about 330,000 residents of a downtown Tehran neighborhood to evacuate. As a result, Tehran appears to be emptying out, with many shops, including the ancient Grand Bazaar, closed. Traffic was reported as bumper-to-bumper on roads leading out of the city, particularly to the west, towards the Caspian Sea, and long lines formed at gas stations. Iranian authorities have canceled leave for doctors and nurses, but they publicly insist that everything is under control, despite placards in the city calling for a severe response to Israel, according to NEWS 10 ABC. Casualties, sadly, have been substantial on both sides. Since Friday, June 13, 2025, Israeli strikes have killed at least 224 people in Iran and wounded 1,277. Iran has retaliated by launching more than 370 missiles and hundreds of drones at Israel, resulting in 24 deaths and over 500 wounded. Just yesterday, Monday, June 16, 2025, an Iranian missile strike hit an oil refinery in Haifa, northern Israel, and a new barrage of Iranian missiles was launched today, Tuesday, causing explosions in northern Israel, as reported by ABC News. Iran has also replaced military leaders killed in earlier strikes.
Those casualty figures are truly heartbreaking. Given the escalating violence and the humanitarian crisis, what are the international community and Iran itself saying about de-escalation? Is there any hope for a ceasefire?
The international community is certainly voicing concerns, Grace. G7 leaders, including Trump, issued a joint statement affirming that Iran, quote, can never have a nuclear weapon and calling for de-escalation, which included a ceasefire in Gaza. French President Emmanuel Macron spoke of ongoing discussions for a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, though as we discussed, Trump publicly contradicted this, stating his return to Washington had nothing to do with a ceasefire, much bigger than that, according to ABC News. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, made a veiled plea to the U.S. on social media platform X, suggesting that, and I quote, one phone call from Washington to muzzle someone like Netanyahu could lead to diplomacy, end quote. Earlier, U.S.-Iran talks had been canceled over the weekend following Israel's initial bombardment. Arakchi also stated that Iran would cease its strikes if Israel reciprocated. However, as of today, June 17, 2025, NEWS 10 ABC reports there are no immediate signs of the conflict de-escalating.
It sounds like we're still far from seeing a peaceful resolution to this, with many miscellaneous events happening right now. Ethan, thank you for breaking down these complex and incredibly important details for us this morning.
My pleasure, Grace.
We'll continue to track developments there, but first, we'll turn our attention to our next story, which is also developing overseas. Welcome back. We turn now to a significant development out of Sacramento, where California's ongoing battle against homelessness faces a dramatic shift. This morning, we're delving into how a proposed state budget could completely reshape local efforts to address the crisis. For more on this, we go to our reporter Chloe, who has been following the details closely. Chloe, what's the big news regarding homelessness funding?
Grace, it's a monumental change that has many advocates deeply concerned. California's primary state funding source for local homelessness efforts, known as the Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention, or HHAP program, is set to go from $1 billion last year to zero in the proposed 2025 to 2026 state budget. This is according to reporting from calmatters.org, cited by Reddit and the Santa Maria Times. It's a sweeping change directly linked to a projected $12 billion state budget deficit, as the Lompoc record has highlighted.
That's a staggering cut. Can you tell us more about the HHAP program and why its elimination is causing such alarm?
Absolutely. The HHAP program was established 6 years ago, and it's been a critical and flexible source of funding for cities, counties, and what are called continuums of care. These are local planning bodies that coordinate services for people experiencing homelessness. HHAP money supports everything from temporary shelters and vital street outreach services to more permanent housing solutions. Without this funding, which has grown from an initial $650 million to $1 billion annually, many fear local programs will have no shelter from the storm, forcing them to scale back or even close.
And how are local governments reacting to this proposed cut? Are they sounding the alarm?
They certainly are, Grace. Mayors from California's 13 largest cities, representing over 11 million residents, have united to urge the state to restore this funding. Sources like proposed budget cuts threaten key homelessness program in California reveal their dire warnings. They say this cut would force the closure of shelter beds, significantly reduce crucial outreach efforts, and terminate rehousing programs, potentially pushing thousands of vulnerable individuals back onto the streets. For instance, San Diego alone stands to lose $14 million, which currently funds 426 shelter beds and 13 full-time street outreach workers. In San Francisco, HHAP funds support 950 shelter beds. Los Angeles reports that the loss of this funding would jeopardize 5,000 emergency shelter beds, and Sacramento funds 97% of its 1,350 shelter beds with HHAP money. Stockton even funds all of its low-barrier shelter beds through the program.
Those numbers are truly impactful. Was HHAP actually making a difference, or were these just feel-good programs without real results?
Proponents of HHAP argue it has been instrumental in preventing a much larger increase in homelessness in California compared to the national average, and that recent investments were finally starting to show positive results. For example, San Diego's 2024 point-in-time count showed a 14% decrease in homelessness, and Sacramento reported a 29% drop over 2 years. Advocates emphasize that consistent, ongoing investment, not a sudden cut, is necessary for meaningful progress. It's truly a case of trying to keep the momentum going.
So if HHAP is out, what is Governor Newsom's administration proposing in its place? Is there a new approach?
Yes, they are promoting a multi-pronged approach that emphasizes local accountability, encampment resolution, and a shift of financial burden more directly onto local governments. The Lompoc Record reports Governor Newsom is pushing cities to implement policies that would force homeless Californians to move their camps every 3 days. In May of this year, his office even released a model ordinance to guide cities and counties in implementing local encampment bans, according to, quote, California shifts homelessness strategy, eliminating key funding and pushing local burden.
And what about funding for these new initiatives, or for mental health services, which often intersect with homelessness?
That's where Proposition 1 comes in. The administration points to the availability of $3.3 billion in Proposition 1 funds, specifically designated for expanding behavioral health housing and treatment options for individuals with serious mental illness and substance use disorders. However, critics note that Proposition 1 funds are not a direct substitute for the flexible operational funding HHAP provided for broader homelessness services. The new approach also includes a stringent accountability framework. Any future homelessness funding will reportedly be tied to stronger accountability policies, like requiring a compliant housing element and prioritizing funding for pro-housing designated local governments. The state has even launched accountability.ca.gov to track local progress.
So while HHAP is on the chopping block, are there any other significant funding sources for homelessness that will continue or even increase?
Indeed, there are, Grace, though the overall nature of spending is shifting. The Encampment Resolution Fund, or ERF, will see an additional $100 million for 2025 to 2026, bringing its total investment to $1 billion over 5 years. Proposition 1, approved by voters in March 2024, provides a $6.38 billion bond for behavioral health treatment facilities and supportive housing, with approximately $2 billion reserved for permanent supportive housing. The Community Assistance, Recovery, and Empowerment, or CARE Act, is slated to receive $107.6 million. And the budget maintains funding for BH Connect, a multi-year initiative with $8 billion in state and federal resources. However, it's worth noting the May Revise also proposes excluding continued funding for the HomeSafe and the housing and disability advocacy programs, which target homelessness prevention for older adults and people with disabilities.
It sounds like a lot of moving parts. What about a longer-term strategy? And where do things stand today, June 17th, on this proposed budget?
For the long term, Governor Newsom has also proposed creating a new California Housing and Homelessness Agency to better coordinate state efforts. His administration also voices support for a $10 billion housing bond, though that wouldn't be on the ballot until November 2026, with funds not available until 2027 at the earliest. So we're talking about approximately 500 days until that bond is even up for a vote. As of today, June 17th, the final decision on HHAP program funding in California's 2025 to 2026 state budget remains unresolved. While a constitutional deadline to pass a budget passed on June 15th, negotiations between the governor and the legislature are in their final stages. The outlook for HHAP funding appears bleak, but advocacy groups are still pressing for a last-minute inclusion of at least partial funding to keep these programs from being completely homeless.
Chloe, thank you for breaking down this complex issue. It's clear there's still a lot up in the air, and we'll be watching to see how this all shakes out. Tragedy in Ukraine this morning: at least 15 people are dead and more than 100 injured. Russia unleashed one of the fiercest aerial bombardments on Kyiv since the war began. This was a relentless 9-hour overnight assault. Russian forces launched 440 drones and 32 missiles across the country. Most of the attack focused on the capital. The weapons included 2 powerful Kinzhal ballistic missiles. These are notoriously difficult to stop. The targets were largely residential areas. A 9-story apartment building was torn apart by a direct hit. Rescue workers are still digging through the rubble. Emergency services report finding dangerous cluster munitions. Among the deceased is a 62-year-old American citizen. President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the assault as pure terrorism. He was set to push for stronger sanctions at the G7 summit in Canada. For its part, Russia's Ministry of Defense claims it only hit military targets. But the images of civilian devastation from Kyiv tell a very different story. Back here at home, there is a story of shocking violence in Minnesota. A 40-hour reign of terror has left a state lawmaker and her husband dead. Authorities are calling this spree a political assassination. It also left another state senator and his wife seriously injured. Former House Speaker Emerita Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark were fatally shot in their home. Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette were also shot multiple times. But they survived. The attacks triggered the largest manhunt in the state's history. It ended in the capture of 57-year-old Vance Bolter. Authorities say Bolter had a list of other political targets. He was impersonating a police officer to gain access to his victims' homes. Officials are calling this a chilling attack on our democracy. Shifting gears to international trade, the US and the UK are hailing a new agreement. But it seems they have not quite steeled themselves for the toughest negotiations. Announced at the G7 summit, the pact slashes tariffs on British cars and aerospace products. The deal even got a memorable rollout. President Trump initially announced it was with the European Union, before correcting himself. However, the elephant in the room remains. This is the steep 25% tariff on British steel and aluminum. The White House says any relief depends on the UK proving its supply chains are secure. This process seems to be anything but stainless. Meanwhile, a major paradox is unfolding in Washington over healthcare. Medicaid is more popular than ever. 83% of the public views it favorably. This includes 3/4 of Republicans. Despite this, a new GOP-led bill aims to slash its funding by a staggering $800 billion. This bill is dubbed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It aims to help finance tax cuts and border spending. The program covers over 71 million Americans. Critics warn the cuts could leave millions uninsured. And finally, the Supreme Court is preparing to wade into some murky waters. The justices will hear an appeal from Chevron and other oil giants. These are landmark lawsuits filed by Louisiana parishes seeking billions for coastal land loss. The big question is not about guilt, it is about jurisdiction. The energy companies are drilling down on their argument. They say the cases belong in federal court, not state court. This is because some of their work was once directed by the government. This comes after a Louisiana jury already ordered Chevron to pay over $740 million to restore damaged wetlands. The parishes argue the federal court appeal is just a delay tactic. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.